Hello, everyone, and welcome to our next MTI Live webinar. Today, we're going to be talking all about cleared pathways, so how to build proof in product at scale. So I'm joined here today by four experts in manufacturing, supply chain, and post-market studies as well that have worked with cleared devices already on the market to scale their impact and potential with patients. So as you guys know, having a device cleared is only the first step to impacting patient care. So we're going to guide medtech startups specifically through pivotal manufacturing, supply chain, and data collection decisions to help shape your long-term success for smooth sailing in clear waters beyond this regulatory approval. So we're going to explore when a design is good enough to lock, how to anticipate common manufacturing pitfalls, and how to structure transparent supply chain agreements that balance risk and costs. So our awesome panelists here today are going to share strategies for choosing the right contract manufacturing partners, deciding when to scale in-house instead, and how to build these resilient supplier networks. And then finally, we're going to talk a bit about post-market studies, cost management around that, and design changes as a result to ensure that startups achieve the highest impact as they scale. So without further ado, I'd like to start by introducing our amazing panelists who are going to share a couple minutes about their background before we dive into questions. So we'll start first with Elizabeth Pennell, who's the Business Development Director at Olympus Surgical. Welcome, Liz.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. My name is Liz. I've worked for almost 20 years in supply chain and procurement through automotive, med space, and a little bit of aerospace in mainly procurement background, so category strategy and different types of sourcing roles. In my current role at Olympus, I support mergers and acquisitions, so looking at potential mergers, acquisitions, and strategic partnerships, mainly from a procurement, supply chain, and manufacturing perspective. Thanks for having me, Nicole.
Awesome. Great to have you here, Liz. Next up, we've got Jeff Christian, who's the founder, executive chairman, and chief inventor at PDV MedTech. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you for having me. I've been in medtech for about 45 years, with a few years in aerospace prior to that. I've been with larger companies, but I've spent most of my time in startup mode. I was with Advanced Cardiovascular Systems when they were a startup, and now that went on to be a lot of things. But coronary angioplasty was their shtick. And then I left there to join a startup, which ultimately was acquired on technology I invented. And then I left there to get into surgical instruments. And then I left there for other things. My last one that was traditional employment was acquired by Johnson & Johnson. And after a while with Johnson & Johnson, I realized I really missed the startup environment. So I founded Phoenix Ventures in 2001. Intending to service the needs of the startup community when a doctor or an entrepreneur had an idea but didn't know how to execute. And I really am more inventor than anything else. And so supply chain management stuff that I always had to get into, but my heart really is in the napkin sketch and go out and make this thing work stage. Phoenix Ventures was recently acquired by a multinational company, and so I am in the process of phasing out entirely and entering the silver years of retirement and consulting and so on.
Oh, it's super exciting. And 45 years in medtech. Wow, we're really excited to hear all you've seen the industry through and through. So really excited to hear your input today,
Things have
Jeff.
changed a little bit over the years.
Just a little. Not as much as we would like, I think. All right, next up, we've got Travis Hintz from Minutronics. Welcome, Travis.
Thank you, Nicole. I appreciate it. It's wonderful to be here today. I'm Travis Hintz. I'm the Vice President of Operations with Minutronics Medical. I've spent my 35-year career in everything from automotive, chemical manufacturing, 3M, personal safety division, in all aspects of operations and supply chain through manufacturing. I've been in procurement for about 6 years, quality, logistics, pretty much everything. And now in the medtech space for the last almost 4 years, working through the operations here at Minutronics Medical, much like Jeff, being able to take things from the back of the napkin all the way into commercial manufacturing and understand what that looks like from a supply chain perspective. So I'm happy to be here.
Great. Thanks for joining us, Travis. And then last but not least, we've got Sahil Mehta from Plexa. And so Plexa was actually one of our cohort companies last year in the MedTech Innovator Accelerator, developing really cool technology. I'll let Sahil talk more about it. Welcome to the panel.
Thank you so much. Again, like everyone says, great to be here. Very honored to be asked to contribute to this. So yeah, my background is I'm a plastic surgeon. I did all my training in London. We've created a platform technology that essentially combines two things, prehabilitation and preconditioning to help patients get ready for surgery. We're focusing on breast surgery at the moment, and that's kind of what I know breast. Essentially what we're trying to do is help patients sort of optimize themselves before their surgery to prevent complications. I've made a big life change. Just over a month ago, I hung up my scalpel temporarily to go absolutely full time on the business. I was working both part time and clinically and doing startup, and I wouldn't recommend that necessarily. But I've just moved to Los Angeles, so I'm dealing with the sunshine, the mosquitoes, etc. And very excited to be here. We launched Bloom 43 in the US yesterday, so it's a really big moment for us. And I've just been through this whole manufacturing supply chain process, so it's very, very fresh, very, very raw. So if I cry a little bit, you'll know why. So yeah, looking forward to sharing my thoughts.
Thanks, Sahil. And very lucky to have grabbed you right after your US launch and also after moving to LA. That's super cool. So for the cohort, definitely chat with him. He'll be stopping by our MTI reception on Monday. So try to find him in person. He's an amazing, amazing guy. Awesome. So for those of you joining on LinkedIn, if you guys think of questions for these incredible panelists as we're going through things, drop those in the comments of the event. So the amazing Gabby on our team is going to get me those off to the side, and we'll try to work those in during the period. Make the most of this being a live webinar. So please, if you're listening, think of good things to ask them. And for the cohort, as usual, if you guys have questions to ask, drop those in that Q&A box at the bottom, and we'll tackle those after the live portion is over. So to kick things off, we've got medtech companies in MedTech Innovator at all different sorts of stages. And a lot of them that are, early on are kind of wondering, when is the right time to freeze their design? So when do they know really is the right time to start moving forward with scaled up manufacturing? So maybe I'll start with you, Sahil. Like when did you guys freeze your design? What made you guys pull that trigger?
Yeah, it's so I saw the list of questions before, and I just thought it's something I can really talk about now. It's a difficult question to answer because I don't think there is a right answer. It's a combination of how your team feels. But what we did, and again, I don't know the breadth of experience within your cohort this year, but we spent a long, long, long time going through user requirements and figuring out whether the product we were building was right for our patients. So we actually didn't commit anything to kind of even building out a prototype until we had really delineated what that was for the user. And in this case, the user was the patient. So depending on what device you're building, it could be the surgeon, it could be the nurse, it could be even the hospital system. So that was really important to us, and we've always been very conscious and very proud to say that at Plexa we do everything in a very patient-centric focus. So we have a patient champion who's part of our team, and any questions we have about design, we run past her, and and then we got to the stage where we started to build out the prototype, and then we tested that on another group of users and figured out whether that was right as well. And so only then were we in a situation where we thought, right, we're able to move to manufacture now. And it was then during that process that we decided to freeze. There's also this phrase in plastic surgery that we use quite a lot, which is perfect is the enemy of good. So you want to make sure that what you've got is good enough and you're not trying to achieve perfection, because actually what we've just found out were there certain things we have had to change, even when we've gotten so far in that manufacturing process, they just don't quite translate from what you build in-house to what you do with your manufacturing partner, even if you've been working together on it for a long time. So it's a difficult question to ask, and I also think sorry to answer, but I think the big takeaway I've had from this whole process is you have to be absolutely honest with yourself, and if it's not right, don't be afraid to say it's not right to freeze yet. In many ways, you have your own you set your own timeline. And okay, you have pressures of investors and things like that and milestones you're trying to meet, but actually it's better to delay a little bit longer and achieve what you really want to achieve, than just try and release something early. And that's been my reflection over from the last sort of 6 months in particular. So we did freeze design in about, gosh, when was it? In July, I think. So it felt quite late in the process, but it was the right decision.
Yeah, and great advice. Perfect is the enemy of good, but you want to make sure it's actually good. So wait until you're happy with that, and you can, comfortably say that this is a positive device or technology for patients to use. Jeff, would love to hear your perspective on this too. You've worked with, numerous teams over the years, and I'm sure they've had different strategies for what is good enough. So what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, Sael's comments were spot on. A product's never going to be perfect. And engineers, especially software engineers, always want to add this feature, that little thing. But sometimes a simple addition of a feature could cause 6, 12, 18 months delay. So the CEO is responsible for judging what must be done, what must not be done, and so on. There's regulatory ramifications as well as user ramifications. But ultimately, I would say first and foremost, you have to know your product's safe. If there's anything that is going to pose a risk to the patient that is beyond an acceptable risk, you just can't go there. But when you know it's safe and the users are telling you that, yeah, this is a product I would buy again, I emphasize again, because any salesman can sell something once, right? But when the user will buy it again, then technically you probably have something. I would say don't put too much emphasis on your first round on aesthetics. A lot of people spend huge amounts of money on making things looking really sexy or classy or sleek or whatever. And that's not what the doctors need. They need something that's going to function and help them practice better and save lives. And so the CEO's job is to balance all those things.
Yeah.
And it's tricky because, like I said, engineers always and marketeers always want to have one more feature.
Yeah, you can always save those for later, but make sure everything is safe at the end of the day is what it sounds like. And bring everything back to the user needs, as Sahil was talking about. Maybe a feature, it could be sexy in aesthetic sense, but maybe it also, serves a user need. Maybe there's something about handling the device that could be enhanced. Maybe it seems aesthetic, but so make sure that these features you're adding on actually are functional at the end of the day. So let's assume now that we've locked our design and we're moving to scale up manufacturing. So Travis, we'd love to hear from you. What are some common manufacturing challenges faced by these early stage medtech startups, and how can founders mitigate them if they encounter them?
Well, I'll go right back to what Sahil was talking about, right? And when you lock that design, it's not always, it's locked, but it may not necessarily work in manufacturing. Even though you've been working hand in hand with your supply chain the entire time, or your contract manufacturer, you've been working hand in hand to work on that design, it doesn't always translate. It's one thing to start making things at a scale versus making things on a prototype mold or a prototype tool, and really understanding that, because things don't always fit together in the same way as they do on an engineering bench or a test bench as they do in a scalable manufacturing environment. And really understanding how that fits together and goes together. You've got to be able to be nimble and be able to make those changes.
Yeah, great answer. And Liz, so you've worked a lot with different supply chains as well as part of the medtech products that you've been working with. So what are some best practices for structuring these supply agreements and building strong relationships with your partners?
So I agree with everybody's comments about the ingredients it takes to get ready to move forward. And I would say, let's not forget our supplier and purchasing friends here in this journey to move forward, right? Because a supply agreement is as critical, as a readiness indicator of anything else. And I think the important thing, supply agreements are a broad term, right? And a supply agreement approach from a component that you can get off the shelf is going to be different than a component that you've done custom development and design work to an engagement with a company a CM such as Midtronics, where it can do the full suite of all of the management of your supply agreements or your supply needs, right? So I think it's wise to know what type of product am I buying, what are the rules of engagement with this supplier, and when it's pre-freeze, what are the expectations? Are they going to help develop test software? Are you going to be aligned on criteria? What's the lead time? Is there a defined amount of quantity that you want these people to build? And what does that price include, right? Once an agreement has, a design has been frozen and you're in a supply agreement term line, then the expectations of the relationship should be very straightforward because your design should be frozen, your specifications should be dialed in, and really it's about an opportunity for you to establish the type of relationship you want with suppliers. And as I mentioned, not every relationship is the same, right? So really understand your strategy and what you're buying and who you're buying it from. Not who just you're buying it from to prove out your concept, but is this person going to be able to support you through growth and through expedites and through increases and changes? I think a thing we see a lot in med tech, right, is that there are a lot of people who have very niche skills and qualities, and those businesses might not always be structured to support a long-term growth phase. So that's why it's important in the beginning to understand who owns this design, what are the details that are going to be captured, and how transferable is that in the future if I need to make that decision to continue to grow my business.
Great advice, Liz. And really like that you mentioned, thinking about your future growth as well, not just what you guys need this year, but, 5 years from now, where are you anticipating to go? And can they kind of meet that demand and evolve alongside you? So would love to hear from you, Jeff. Some companies may think about having multiple suppliers for the same component to maybe mitigate the risk. But, what are kind of the trade-offs here with complexity of managing these different suppliers, and what should companies really think about at the end of the day when they're trying to decide how many suppliers for a certain component makes sense?
Yeah, a pretty complex issue, but startups really can't afford to spread themselves too broadly. Uh, and so don't expect that you're going to have 2 or 3 suppliers for something unless it's the critical technology, which hopefully they're controlling internally anyway, but that's a different story. But something Travis said is very, very important. Realize that there's a huge difference between what the engineer built and prototyped and what's going to scale to 10,000 units a month or whatever. And every quantum leap that you make in your manufacturing scale presents different problems. Any engineer can make their project work. That doesn't mean that handing it off to someone else that it's going to work the same way, or that they're going to have the understanding of the nuances that made the early stages work. So when you make 100 of something, you have problems. When you make 1,000 of something, you have different problems. When you make 10,000 of something, you have yet different problems that didn't reveal themselves until you're making something at scale. And then when you're making 100,000 at a time of something, things again show up that you'd never even thought of when you were only making 1,000 units. So with that in mind, I think you need to be aware of, as someone commented, I forget who, but what your supplier is good at may not fit the needs for 2 years from now. And you have to be careful, like this is going to sound wrong, but you have to be careful not to trust what a company's salesman told you their capabilities are. You have to get into the weeds and understand by talking to Travis, not his sales guy, about what they can really do. Or frankly, me too. Talk to me, not just my salespeople, and so on, to understand what can happen as it scales up. So just recognize that scale up is a complex process, but the startups can't afford multiple suppliers. But there comes a time when you must have multiple suppliers.
Mitigate there. Great. So yeah, difficult to know when that transition happens, and would love to hear from you, Travis. What is some of your advice for startups when they're transitioning from this pilot production as a small startup to high volume manufacturing, increased distribution, maybe global manufacturing as well, and when they're thinking about sourcing these different types of partners and in multiple suppliers at once?
No, it makes total sense, and I understand, Nicole. It's really understanding first and foremost is really understanding your market, right? To your point, you just talked about a very big, launch and global and how's it going to go. And, the one thing that is I've seen over multiple years is the Achilles heel is businesses will always aim high, right? Every business sales guy is going to aim very high and they'll come in lower somewhere down below, right? So really understanding that demand plan is critical to understanding how you're going to set up your supply chain, because that information is going to come back to me or my operations team, or even from the far side of my MPI side, and say, this is how I'm going to set it up. I'm going to go look for vendors that can do a scale of 10,000 units a year. And then it comes in at 5,000 units a year. So that's going to have an impact, right? That can have an impact across cost. That can have an impact across a multitude of things that could impact who I pick as my supply partner for those particular components, right? And what that looks like. So really understanding that base demand plan and really locking in on everybody wants to overachieve and really drive those sales in year one, year two, but really kind of understanding that and getting a partner that can grow with you to say, okay, let's be realistic. If it's 5,000, let's shoot for 5 and go for 10, and get those ranges in there to really understand what that looks like, because all that does is really allow your supply chain, your operations manufacturing teams to really build in that scale, right? And understand I need, to be able to scale from 5 to 10, I need 2 more benches or 2 more tabletop setups or 2 more test stations, and what that looks like. And they can build that timeline to do that and then have that conversation about what scaling looks like. So everyone's on the same page, where if I come in and say, I'm going to do 100 this year, and all of a sudden after month 2, I say, did I say 100? I meant 1,000. Well, that's a big change, right? That's an incremental, to Jeff's point, that's an incremental increase, right? That the supply chain may not be ready to absorb because you've got a monster lead time on your one critical component that you've got one supplier that can manufacture today, right? So really understanding that and aim for what you really want to, really what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah. Great advice. And would also love to hear from you, Travis, too. When startups should decide to scale this manufacturing in-house, maybe, versus partnering with a contract manufacturing organization. Like, maybe you have an example of this. Like, when is the right time to do this? And does it really depend on the complexity of the manufacturing process? What have you seen startups do in either direction?
I think it depends on the startup or the company, right? And Jeff's even talked a little bit about this even before, this all started, about how his journey's been through, being in and out of companies and that kind of thing and what that looks like. Building a supply chain, and Liz understands this very well, being in procurement for the number of years that she's been in procurement, building a supply chain operations and manufacturing, it's not a small process, right? It's a build a manufacturing thing, building a process. It really depends on what they want to do. Do you want to scale? Do you want to get to the next innovation of your product and continue to move through product innovation, the next best thing? Or do you want to run a supply chain, right? Do you want to run an operations? Do you want to be a global distribution center and those kind of things? It really depends on the company and what they want to do. I would tell you, when you talk about contract manufacturers, you look for contract manufacturers that can do what you want to do from a future perspective. Minitronics Medical, we're a global company, right? We can do things on a global scale. We understand what that looks like. So as you grow, you've got that capability, or the CDMO has those capabilities that you're looking for. That lets the innovator or the CEO, to Jeff's point, of sales, stay in that space of, how do I design my next best Gen 2, Gen 3, and really stay in that space where they want to be, and they're not worried about manufacturing, supply chain, procurement, and all of those other relationships that get pretty complicated, can be quite expensive.
For sure. And yeah, Liz, would love to hear from you on this. When you're thinking about these CMOs, what's the best way to verify their actual capabilities and track record? Are there specific, certifications you look for? Do you ask for references? How important is this that you vet them, and what role could they actually play in the adoption of your product?
They can be tremendously helpful in providing all the overhead and support. And I think that Travis is exactly right. It depends on what your company's strategy is and what you want your core competency to be. Where do you want to spend your time? When you're investigating contract manufacturers from a high level, trade shows like MDM are very, very, very helpful if you're able to attend those. From a registration standpoint, contract manufacturers have to register with the FDA. So you can go on the FDA website and see the last time a contract manufacturer was inspected. They have to register what devices they manufacture. So if there's any recalls or complaints for those devices, you can even see were those due to manufacturing issues when the FDA issued that finding, as well as the accuracy or the update of their 13485 certification from a quality standpoint. From a business standpoint, are they public or private? Most contract manufacturers would be glad to meet with you and show you a tour. They don't have to show anything proprietary. But when you're engaging with someone in their office, you know, observe, 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 right? Are they small? Is the building full? Do they write everything on paper? Is there only one shift? Do they have warehouse space? Are they partnered with a sterilizer that could help you? Do they work with other med tech companies? There's a lot of information you can gather, some of which is public, like the quality information I talked about. You can also see legal information, I think, to a limited extent, but really the ability to interview and interact with them. Any contract manufacturer that wants your business is going to give you that time.
Yeah, great advice. And I love that you mentioned, going there in person yourself, doing these audits yourself, not just, obviously great to see when the last time FDA has done these audits, but building that relationship yourself and seeing maybe some opportunities that may lie as well for them to improve and for you guys to improve your working relationship together can be very helpful. Sahil, I'd love to hear from you on this as well, because you've gone through this process yourself of identifying a CMO that you're working with. So what did you consider, and how'd you end up choosing who you chose?
Yeah. So I'm listening to Liz, Travis, and Jeff and thinking, oh my God, I wish I'd known some of this before. I also think, and look, forgive me for saying this, that it's quite daunting, a lot of the things you're saying. So, and I say that just because, when you start your startup, you've got your idea, blah, blah, blah. And one of the things you just do not consider, certainly I didn't, as a doctor and then as a startup founder, is this whole manufacturing process. So suddenly in my vocabulary, now I understand the words supply chain, lead time, components, critical supplier, um, all sorts of things that I had absolutely no idea about. And so this whole thing has been a total education. So our chosen contract manufacturer is Panasonic, which is a phenomenal thing for us because they are a company that obviously have a global name, they can scale. And it's been a really, really awesome relationship actually because they've been very, very invested in what we're doing. It's kind of strange that, so I went to visit the plant and I mean, it just blew my mind, completely because the engineering team had done a lot to go and set up the manufacturing process. And so I went to see it sort of when it was all finished. And, you have your little startup medical device being manufactured alongside big brand names like, Bosch and all this kind of stuff. And it's like that really blew my mind. So we looked at three different contract manufacturers and they're all based in Wales. Apparently that's a hotbed of medical manufacturing, and I had absolutely no idea about that either. So, but the nice thing about that was that all of the contract manufacturers we spoke to gave us personal time. They gave us FaceTime straight away. They had invited us for lunch. We went up as a team, the engineers, myself, etc. So I gave the sort of pitch to them, and one thing that really struck me was that their contract manufacturers almost modus operandi is very different to yours. They're thinking minimum order quantities. They're thinking, is this worth us building in the first place? Because, taking out a whole production line for your product may not be as lucrative compared to others. And that's something I had just never, why would you consider that? Why would you consider that?
Yeah.
And then the whole thing about suppliers as well. So we have multiple suppliers from across the world, and the sad thing is right now is the geopolitical situation is something I really pay attention to because it affects how my product gets built. And I was like, how was that ever on the cards? I had no idea. So, I read an article about how an iPhone gets put together and how many different suppliers that takes, and that was an education as well. And it's like suddenly we're a very, very, very like kindergarten version of that, but still, some of our suppliers are in China, some are in England, some are in other places, And uh, the other thing that really struck me was some components have incredible lead times, and they seem like the most simple components. That our cables have the longest lead time. Why would our cables take longer to build than some of the more complex parts of our product? It makes no sense. So working with Panasonic has been phenomenal because they can help manage that supply chain for you. And now what we're doing is we're in a process of moving to their suppliers. So they have a different purchasing power compared to us as a small startup. And that's something we're really leaning into. So that's been again a whole education. But I would say that like anything really, we're all in this cohort, I guess, more used to going out and pitching for investment and getting that good feeling when you have that meeting with an investor and how it progresses. And it's the same with your contract manufacturers. It's all about a partnership and a relationship. And if it's not going that way, then don't waste time on it. Find a different contract manufacturer. That would be my advice. And certainly for whatever startup number two is going to be for me, the way I would approach that is very differently in that, we don't consider the whole concept of having to go into manufacture and understand that. And sorry, that was the point I wanted to make. I could not have done this without the people on my team who actually understand this. So I met electronics engineer who had built another FDA cleared product for a previous company. I met him through a friend. That friend I met on a stag do, a bachelor party in Budapest, and we were just chatting. He works for Apple, and we were chatting, over clearly alcohol-free drinks, but like we were just talking about what we were doing, and he said, "Look, I want you to meet this guy." And he introduced me to someone called Matt, who had done the whole manufacturing process and managing the manufacturer to the point where you live with the manufacturer almost whilst you're setting up your production line. Without that expertise, there's no way we would be in the position that we were in. So for whoever's out on the call, CEOs, chief product officers, whatever, whoever's here who don't get this, don't worry. There are people who out there who will understand it, and it's really important you get that kind of expertise into your team because it's so difficult. So yeah, that's been my experience, and yeah,
Great,
still
great,
wearing
very
some battle wounds, but yeah.
humble perspective, Sahil. You are now the expert in so many things, and I can't wait to see what startup number two is, by the way. And yeah, so I also want to hear from you too. It sounds like you were looking at these three different CMOs in Wales, which new to me. Also, I knew about Ireland, and the tax benefits of manufacturing there. But what made you land on Panasonic? Were there specific criteria that you were comparing between the three that made them really stand out?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think, look, totally, narcissistic way, the name really stood out. Like, it's an extremely well-known household name. And to put that on our label means a lot. It gives, consumer confidence, etc. The other two manufacturers were brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And in some ways had done a lot more than Panasonic had in the medical device world. So when we went with Panasonic, there's a lot of learning they had to do because medical devices were definitely not their bread and butter. But they were willing to learn with us, and that's what they've done, and we're moving forward together, which is great. But I think for us, it was more about having that global brand behind us and knowing that they had the ability to scale and had that purchasing power. And, we had suddenly a team of experts. I mean, there were some meetings when there were, 25 people in the room from Panasonic, and there were like seven of us. And it was like, whoa, it was like pretty overwhelming actually, because you just not in your wildest dreams you think that that's ever going to happen. But having said that, with the other two contract manufacturers, they were putting that much resource into us as well. So, we had this really great relationship. So I think I definitely took a lot of comfort in the fact that, um, we had three to choose from. And in whatever way we would have had a good service. But actually, what we needed at this point was that global power behind us, almost like in a strategic relationship. And that's why we went with them. And they just gave us the time, yeah, I'm hoping to go, get a trip out to Japan to see them, which would be lovely. But it's yeah, that's what we went for in the end.
Makes sense. Yeah, I know I
Yeah.
was personally very impressed when I saw that news come out. So it's great to hear that someone as big as them is willing to work with a small med device company and definitely has the potential to grow with you. Would love to hear from you, Jeff, your thoughts on comparing different CMOs and what types of things you should look for in this.
Well, Phoenix Ventures is a CDMO, and so we actually prefer that you'd always look at us. But I know full well that there are some things that we aren't going to be the experts in, right? And so there are some things that even some seemingly simple things, there are some companies just do some things particularly well. Why try to reinvent that wheel? And so I commented previously that any startup, in my opinion, really needs to control what is their core technology. If you let that out to others, then you've revealed your magic to others, and there's risk of having technology taken and so on. And that's what you really have to control. Anything else that is much more commonplace, go out to those that do it. Uh, the cable was mentioned. A cable seems like, oh, that's the most simple thing I need. Well, if you haven't designed around a stock standard cable and you have to have a custom cable made, you've got copper supply, you've got plastic supply, you got I need 50,000 or maybe 2,000 feet of cable, and you're competing with someone that makes 1 million feet of cable a year. How are you going to fit into that supplier's schedule when you are nothing to them? And so finding those that will work with you, find those that can scale with you, those can handle the scale that you're currently at is really important. We had, for example, years ago, Clorox came to us because we had quick tooling capability, and a project manager at Clorox said, well, could you handle quantities as low as 35,000 at a time? I said, well, that's our sweet spot. That's what we love. We'll do 100 at a time if that's what you need. And he just about jumped out of his chair because Clorox makes millions of anything a year, and getting someone who would do very low quantity was something they couldn't find. So as you're looking for your supplier, what supplier fits your need at this time, while you're considering what supplier you need for the next phase 2 years from now, and so on and so on. So there are so many factors that go into selecting your CMO, and I'm really impressed with what Sahil mentioned, how much resource those companies put into your project, which blew you away, because if you visited other suppliers, they probably sat down with you and had a brief discussion, and that's all the attention you got. So those that put the kind of resource into that's a way to judge. One thing to be careful of is sometimes someone putting that much resource on something at the early stage is a bit more of a show than reality. And so be careful to not believe what is show.
Yeah.
Get into the weeds again and find out what they can really do, get references from some of their customers, talking about how then to work with them, how they work these kind of problems and so on. There's a lot involved. And most entrepreneurs, by the way, today, most entrepreneurs are not serial entrepreneurs, because if they've succeeded, they've gone on to other things. So people like Sahil, who got into it because he had an idea that he wanted to pursue, it's your first time at it. And you already made the comment, I don't know what my next one's going to be, but I'm going to know better next time. Right? And so realizing that every doctor who has an idea and wants to get it has no clue about any of this, and yet they always think they know. So that is always a challenge. Not not to slam Dr. Hayden,
Unless they're modest, like Sahil.
but to just say that that's the nature of doctors. I have a son-in-law who's a doctor. He's a pathologist. He can't drive a screwdriver. My daughter fixes everything at home because he is a scientist, right? And so doctors who think they know just assume they really don't. And when you start a business, there's so much to learn. So it's all about building relationships and helping them. And that's what we do. Travis and I, for example, specifically, we help those clients who are newbies learn to thrash through the weeds and so on. It's a tricky business.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Jeff. And speaking of going through the weeds, I want to go back to some nomenclature here. So we've been talking about, CMOs, contract manufacturing organizations, and also CDMOs, contract development and manufacturing organizations. So, Travis, would love to hear from you really what the difference between those two are. It's really that D, right? That development in the stage maybe that you're working with companies. So, how does the startup know whether they need that D or not?
Well, a great question, Nicole. I mean, it really is. If I think like Sile when he starts it, if he's the way he kind of talked about the engineer and how he got into all of that and understanding supply chain, it's kind of that same kind of thought process, right? It's like, where are you in your journey, right? Is your device something up here? Are you how do you don't know how to get it on paper? Where do you need that process, and from a Minitronics medical perspective, we are that CDMO that starts with, we'll call it phase 0, right? So I could take it out of your head and put it into a CAD design or a drawing, or I could take your, as Jeff indicated earlier in different conversation, I could take your bicycle part kind of design and make that into something that might be more toward what you're looking to do, right? And get it into phase 1, phase 2, and then move all in through manufacturing. It really is where you are at in that journey. You may have some skills, or you may have a friend or a family member who's an engineer or a designer that kind of does this stuff on the side. And the two of you kind of printed out some 3D parts and you've put together some kind of prototype, if you will. So you've got designs, you might be further along or a little bit further ahead. You've built some things. Some folks who have some mechanical capability. We've seen this all throughout the range. At the same point in time, I've also had places where, people could be in production and they need a manufacturer who can scale, right? So they started out with a more of a design center or design house that really can't take them to scale. So things can be transferred in where I bring in Sahil's unit today and bring it in at a phase 4 up to scalable manufacturing, those kind of things. So it really just depends on where they're at and what kind of help they need at that point in time.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Travis. Hopefully that was helpful for those in LinkedIn. And by the way, those of you listening, if you have any questions still for those panelists, we still got time to cover those. So put those in the comments. We will tackle those in the next 17 minutes or so we've got here. While we're still on the topic of, maintaining these partnerships with our CMOs and suppliers, love to hear from you, Liz. Actually, what are some key strategies for best maintaining these partnerships over time and maybe growing them as your company grows?
Yeah, I think there's been so many good pieces of wisdom shared so far, right? Who is your company? What do you want your company to spend their time on? Who do you want to engage with now? And who do you want to engage with in the future? And when you're in those early stages, taking that design, like Travis was talking about, out of your head on paper, really being clear about the rules of engagement. So true contract manufacturers, you don't see their name on boxes because that's not their business. Their business is support. But it's clear that any design that's developed and specifications that come as part of that brainstorming process stay with you, right? And as you work through a contract manufacturer, not just from design, but from actually building and developing test software and developing criteria, always keep your eye on that specification because you want to be able to take that spec and understand what is yours at the end of the day and what is that other partner's. And then that feeds your future growth strategy. Some contract manufacturers like Panasonic or other areas, they can take you for the long haul, right? Others might just be might be critical for the short term. So I think that that understanding of that relationship is really important. I don't think you need to detail every iota of a relationship in a contract manufacturer, but you should have basic rules of engagement. Are you going to talk to them monthly? Are you going to talk to them weekly? In the beginning, is it a defined order quantity, or do you need to talk about the tiers? And really learn your product, and you'll also get information from them based on their subject matter expertise that can help you refine things. Sterilization processes, who's going to own that? Is a contract manufacturer capable on both a capital and a disposable side, or are they only capable, are they more capable in one area than the other? Are they close to you and they can be responsive, or are they, an ocean away and they might be more difficult to contact? So I think that the supply agreement itself, people only go to agreements when they're angry. They don't usually check it if things are going well. So it's really important to define the rules of engagement and the criteria, as I've said, but don't forget about that softer piece of relationship, especially because CMs can help you take your whole portfolio up, and then your critical supplier sub-assemblies or components outside operations. Those partners can provide a lot of information and really help you finalize your concept. One more caveat, if I may, when you're coming up with cost of goods sold, right? Depending on these strategies we're talking about, don't forget that with the CM, you could have a cost of goods sold that's inclusive of a lot of additional supply chain activities. If you're a founder and you're starting on your own and you're handling your own pieces, don't forget about the fact that you may be taking things in your car from point A to point B, but there's cost associated with that. Or holding inventory, there's cost associated with that. And, in a scalable solution in this supplier management piece, right? Also the supplier quality. Are you inspecting to the quality requirements that you need for, FDA requirements? There's cost associated with that. So it's easy, and I have complete empathy for founders who are so focused on making sure you meet your user needs and you're making a safe product that addresses the problem statement you started with. But don't forget the cost piece of it and the continuity of supply, because you can have a beautiful design, but if you don't have the right partner, or you're not able to consistently manufacture it with a reliable output or with a supply base that can support what you need, you're not going to get very far, right?
Liz, that's a phenomenal point. I just want to jump in quickly. I think that's absolutely right. So many folks that we work with, founders and the like, that total delivered cost model is extremely important to understand, because to your point, they do take things to FedEx and ship it, and they don't think about, well, I just did that on my way home, or I bought 5 of those parts at the hardware store yesterday, and it doesn't get into the cost of the product and those kind of things as they're moving and thinking about scale. But that is it's a very fine point to really kind of drive home, is that total delivered cost model, and really understanding what that looks like. And a good CDMO, CMO can really help you with that and understand all of those hidden rocks. Because to Sale's point, his cable, he doesn't think it's too costly or it takes too much time, but here's the reasons why, right? And this is the reason why. This is, as you think about it, where it's all coming from and the fixtures. And oh, by the way, did you know that you had a gold-plated blah 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 at the end of it that really costs that much more money, and it's got this lead time? And understanding all of those things is really important to drive that point home.
Oh, great. Thanks, Liz and Travis. And would love to, hear from Sahil too about this. And as you guys are maintaining your relationship with Panasonic, what types of information you guys are discussing together as, not just number of units, but other things like new suppliers that come up in your conversations?
Absolutely. So there are things that around new suppliers, so they want to start using their own, and as I say, they have that purchasing power, which is great. But there's a couple of things I just wanted to I've been just written them down. So Liz, you highlighted something, and this is from a, I suppose, founder perspective, is that how you can maintain control and, all your know-how. And the most practical way and obvious way of doing that is that you have your own quality management system. So actually, we've built that, and it's a 13485 system, and it's ours. So you'll have plenty of CMOs and CDMOs who say, "Oh, you can use ours." But actually, ultimately, all that happens is that you
Right.
never learn to do that yourself. And I think actually for us, the most protecting factor of that is that should the relationship with Panasonic fall apart, we have all the information. We're not having to extract it. And so that's been a really powerful, very practical, and you have to do it anyway as the legal manufacturer. But I was really, really keen and very, very focused on the fact that we have to have the right quality management system. It has to be good as well. We just had a state audit yesterday from California, and he actually said that your quality management system is great. If you ever want to manufacture in California and in the US, you're ready to go. And
Hmm.
that was like, okay, well, that's really paid off. So that's a very easy way of doing that. It's almost like it's like an IP moat, that you can even use that, I guess, for investment, because ultimately what I've experienced is that investors are really keen on your own know-how within your team, and it's a very good way of demonstrating that. The other thing, I just wanted to highlight is there's a phrase that we used at the very beginning and we still use, is design for manufacturers. So whenever we were looking to hire, I'm surprised we haven't mentioned it already, that you can build whatever product you want as a prototype, but you may not be able to manufacture it. So I was very keen to make sure that whatever was built had the phrase "it's designed for manufacturers." So we're thinking about what this will become and look like from a manufacturing lens. And that's been, I think we've done that well, mainly because I was able to find people who knew how to do that. So there's no point in finding, engineers who really always think way, way, way like too blue sky. You do have to have people that really understand the process and say, you know what, no, this is not going to work in a manufacturing sense, and you just have to be realistic with it. And then the other thing I'll just say, which I'm sure no one wants to hear as a founder, is that it's expensive. And one of the things that we don't often think about when we're raising money is that process. And again, for my next startup, so what I'm raising for would obviously be to include that. Now, that's not to worry anyone. It's just to know that there will be hidden costs you would just have not have considered just because you don't have the experience. And so don't worry, you can get through it. And I'm still alive, but here I am talking to you about it and survived it. But do understand that I had no idea how much tooling cost. And so, pre-Christmas 2024, there I am signing a check for a supplier in China that does our molds, for 40 grand. And I'm like, what? When, why, who, how was this a thing? And it's like, what is a tool? And they said, oh, it's a big piece of metal core out, blah, blah. And I was like, what? Okay, fine. And I was sort of, it totally caught me by surprise. Caught me by
No.
surprise. And you're the guy or the girl or whoever who signs those checks. You suddenly have that land in your inbox, and you're like, okay, what is this?
No.
It's part of the process, so it's more expensive than I thought it would be, but it's
And
kind of
better
just what
hope things are good and locked and safe by that point when you're signing that check to make that very
exactly.
expensive tool. So,
Yeah.
thanks, Al. Yeah, super helpful. Yeah, Jeff. Yeah, you have something to add?
This is a little bit of a tangent, but it's germane to what was just said. From a tooling standpoint, I always advise newbies especially that they need to plan for at least two sets of tooling, maybe even three. Why? When you're prototyping something, you're going to make a single cavity mold, probably a hand operated mold, for example. Um, and what's going to happen next, you may launch your product off that, but in no time that tool is going to be obsolete, or you're going to change the design. So you got to plan for the next level of tool. And then when you really want to ramp up, then you need to plan on having an 8 cavity mold that runs the lights out and so on. And that one's going to cost you $150,000, or whatever. And people don't seem to want to believe that. But that's the reality. You need to plan on stages of tooling over time. We've got a product that we've been making for 15 years that I built the first molds in the garage. And I recommended every couple of years, you need to build new tools to bring the cost down and so on. And they would not budget for new tooling. So we are still using molds that I made in the garage 15 years ago, making quantities, manually pulling off the machine because they would never budget for new tools. Very, very frustrating. And that company's been acquired twice. And so it's always dealing with someone new who you have to go with the argument on why they need new tooling and so on. So, that's a very important comment you made, that you weren't even aware of what tooling was. All the entrepreneurs who may be listening to this need to know Tooling will surprise you, but plan on doing it in stages. Keep it as simple as you can get away with for now, knowing you're going to be more complex in 2 years.
Yeah, great point, Jeff. So we got a question from LinkedIn, which is around different phases of a project, and if there are standard phases. We talked about phase 4, and how this also. I would love to hear from you guys how this plays into the regulatory process as well. There's clearly a stage where you're still at design, you haven't filed anything yet. So then there's a stage where you've submitted your regulatory filing, and then maybe you have clearance, and it's based around this design that all your test results are from. And then you go from there, right? Like you scale, maybe you get feedback from post-market studies. Maybe Jeff, we can hear from you on this. Like, first of all, how would you break down these different phases? And then, secondly, when does a new design change require a new regulatory filing?
Was that direct to me?
Yep.
So the new regulatory filing, that is an interesting one. And this, in my opinion, needs to play into the strategy from the beginning, but you have to know to build this into the strategy. So when you build your risk analysis, you have to consider what's happening now, where might the project evolve. The doctor wants new features, the engineer wants new features, the marketing wants new features. Well, what are those features? Is this a class 1, a class 2, or a class 3 device? And what might be required to do that? Is it a material change or is it a functional change? If it's a material change, do we have to do all new biocompatibility testing, or is it in the same family that the FDA could accept that it is a material that doesn't require an elaborate change in filing? And so it's much more complex than a one-minute answer can give you. But I'll tell you one thing that happened with Johnson & Johnson. We were speaking about this before we actually started the webinar. I built a prototype for a device in the garage, which was outside of the scope of what the company that I was working for did, but we did it anyway. It was acquired by Johnson & Johnson. We had actually gotten clearance for this product with the statement that it was used for gynecologic surgical procedures such as, and we listed a few. And Johnson & Johnson, after acquiring this, they said, oh, this requires a new filing because we don't mention specifically one thing. And then we said, no, look at our clearance. We state broadly, and therefore we fall under that umbrella of the broad statement. And they spent 6 months preparing for new filing with a lot of work that goes into that, only to decide, you know what, we don't need to file. That was very frustrating because my team spent a huge amount of time trying to support their regulatory group on what they perceived to be a new filing. So again, what is required? You need to understand what's required for class 1, 2, and 3 for each of those, because different things for each of those would require a new filing. Class 1, of course, is always easy because it's actually a registration, not a submission, right? And so you can make a lot of changes on class 1. Class 2, you can do a lot of things, but class 3, almost never, without discussions with the FDA on what you're doing and why and so on. So your regulatory group has to be aware of that. And the CEO is responsible for all those risks. And so I would advise new CEOs, don't acquiesce to what a regulatory consultant says just because a regulatory consultant said so.
Yeah.
It's the CEO's responsibility to mitigate all those risks and make the judgments on what they're going to spend the money on, a new filing or what classification. And if you're taking risks, be aware of those risks and know that your board's going to hold you accountable for those risks you took and so on.
Great advice. A really good example is these companies are moving forward beyond that filing and thinking about, they're running these post-market studies. Obviously, they're going to be getting some feedback from these as well. And, curious maybe to hear from you, Sahil. I know you're not quite, in these post-market studies yet, but like, how are you guys approaching, building this evidence to support your adoption and maybe down the road, making changes to your design?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things that I've wanted to really get out of as a clinician is the whole idea of things being academic, staying in academia, and that actually what we're focusing on is building out real world evidence. So now, because we're of our particular regulatory pathway, we're legitimate, we can go onto the market. Actually, what we want to do is get real experience. So there's no randomization, there's no, you know, uh, we don't need ethical approval or anything like that. But actually, what we want to do is make sure that what we've built is doing what we wanted it to do through user feedback. So, every device that goes out gets followed up, etc. So, and we're also doing that because of cost, because I know how much clinical trials cost. And we're the post-market part again is about the safety of the device, its performance, and making sure, as I say, that you've built what you intended to build and it's delivering what you intended it to deliver. So we're just trying to do it in a kind of like semi bootstrap way. We don't want to blow the budget on these big post market studies. I think the post market studies, if they're randomized and ethical approval and all that kind of stuff, that's because you're doing potentially a multi-center definitive trial. That's on the horizon, but to do that, we want to apply for a grant to do that because we don't want that to have to come out of the company necessarily. But yeah, we're just trying to approach it in a very practical way. And one of the things we've worked on a lot is getting those KOLs, within my own surgical network. So we've got surgeons we're working with who are happy to support us on that. And that's maybe unique to our situation, given the fact that I'm a clinician founder. But either way, you can find those people who are willing to be that early adopter and support you on that. Because actually, this is the other thing is that in the same way that we were able to get Panasonic, the way you get your KOLs, you get your investors, you bring them on the journey, you bring them on the story, and people love being part of that. And it's exciting. And I hear from other startups, I think, God, I'd like to be part of that. But it's that's it. You just bring everyone with you together, and you ultimately boil it back down to your mission. So all those foundations that you start with, they run through the entire process from your design, your manufacture, your post-market studies, everything. So just we're doing it in the most practical and cost-effective way possible, and also wanting we believe is meaningful because it's real-world evidence.
Sahil, I think that's a really good point about launching the product in the limited market release concept, like the smaller group first, right? And obviously, any feedback around safety or efficacy has to be addressed immediately. But I think it's wise to plan for a future larger pull or a Gen 2 or however you want to phrase it once you've incorporated usability feedback in addition, to design changes and tweaks that might come from a manufacturing partner as well to group those changes in a planned fashion. Obviously, if something is more urgent, it has to be addressed quicker. But just in general, to kind of dip your toe into the water before a mass production is a wise approach.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Yeah, sorry, there is no one and done here at all. It's an evolution, it's a journey. And I mean, I know as a clinician that I've seen various medical devices go on their kind of, evolution. And the Gen 1 of whatever that was, whether it be a topical negative pressure or even a breast implant or something like that, the technology has changed. But it's relied on, and the interesting thing is, I've been like, for example, I've been going to the same breast conference in London for the last 12 years now, and I've seen that consistent that changes in devices, in manufacturing processes, like materials, all that sort of thing happen over time. But what's really interesting is that the people that support it in terms of the surgical community are the same people. They have that early adopter mindset. So, and I've really, really taken this like seriously now. It's like just forget about those skeptics. Forget about, there's like that spectrum of people that are innovators, early adopters, late adopters, and then skeptics, whatever. Those innovators, early adopters that really are your friends, and find them. And just, they will always be enthralled and excited by your new idea. And that's, use them to your advantage because they are great in these moments. And it is all a journey. It's such a cliche, but it's true.
Yeah. So get that feedback early, get those groups of KOLs aligned before you make those design decisions, sign that 40K check for that mold. But would also like to know, as these startups are scaling, and obviously there are some changes that will need to be made. Jeff, do you have some advice for startups on what to do or what not to do as they scale commercially and think about these studies and how it impacts, maybe design changes?
I mentioned before that one thing that's really important, and it took me a while to learn this because, I'm the inventive type who gets excited about an idea and want to run with it. But my director of engineering years ago really hammered into me that a crucial part of the beginning of a project is your risk analysis, because bubbling to the surface through the risk analysis process, you need to understand what specifications are going to be required by the agencies and so on. You're going to learn what the market may really consider a risk. You're going to learn through the process how you should then direct your development process. One of those is not part of the medical risk, but it's part of the business risk. I had a company come to me one time and say, we want you to develop XYZ. And I spent a bunch of time working on this, according to what they requested. And when I went back to them, they said, oh, we just realized that we're in violation of 2 patents. And I said, and they had been working on their idea for a couple of years. And I said, wait a minute. So you spent 2 years working on your idea before anyone did a patent search, and now you don't have budget to pay me for what you asked me to do. 2 years spent without doing this. Now this holds for the regulatory research as well as the intellectual property research and so on. Some things you better know up front so you don't spend your entire budget doing the wrong things. And that's probably a little bit off the direction that you were wanting me
Great
to
example.
onto, but that's what I've found to be really important. The most expensive thing in a project is a bad decision, and going the wrong direction is a bad decision.
Yeah. That's really great advice, Jeff, and always important to know what not to do in addition to what to do. Want to come back quickly before we end here to the LinkedIn question we got about like different phases as well, and maybe Travis, I'll want you to speak to this a little bit, how you see these different phases of the development process, especially because Minitronics, you guys have this Design for Excellence framework, which our cohort just learned about last week. So how do you guys think about the different phases and what to consider as you're growing as a company?
I think it really depends on where the customer's coming in, right, and where the customer's at. Again, if someone's starting with a design that's in their brain, that's coming out of the back, we're going to start in that phase 0 range of really getting it out, getting an understanding, trying to lay out to Sahel's point, some of the things that are going to be needed to really get that design into testing, right? First in human, those kind of things, and really understand where those milestones are, and really understand that. So that's where we talk that like a phase 0. And once you get through some of those testings and phases and regulatory approvals, then you're starting, and that's not a short timeline, right? I mean, you're 18, 24 months kind of timelines where things are still changing and manipulating based on efficacy and things of the nature of what the design is and what you intend it to do. Then you're moving into phase 2, phase 3 of DVT, design verification testing, to vet it out and understand that this is where you are. And then really from design verification, you can kind of get yourself launched into that commercialization mode, right? And really launch into, call it a phase 3, phase 4, and in what we'll call phase 5 or commercialization. And it's more of a journey, and it's not just I don't want it to think of like a light switch moment, because it's really not. I mean, this is a multi-year kind of thought process, and really wrapping your brain around how long that takes from start to finish is something that, especially innovators or people that don't think about, how long it takes to get things to market, really have to consider and understand that they're in it for a long period of time. It's not just a short stint. And really that goes back to who you're partnering with, and really that CDMO methodology of what can they bring to the table? How can they help me? Do they have, like, we have 150 engineers on staff, mechanical, electrical, software, and really understand what that looks like and help bring your design to fruition in the market.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Travis. Hopefully that was helpful to whoever asked that on LinkedIn. And yeah, Jeff, you want to add on to that?
You know, Travis just hit on something really important, and he articulated that really well. The newbie hasn't a clue what they're getting into. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't, right? Because it's just too complex and demanding. Doctors have often over the years asked me, why does it take so long and cost so much to develop this? And I finally hit on an analogy that they got, and I use this all the time with them. And I'll offer it because the whole industry can use this. I say, well, doctor, what's your specialty? And say, well, I'm a cardiac surgeon. Okay. How long was your training after med school? 10 years. How long into your 10-year training before you were competent to perform surgery? And they usually say about 3 years. And I say, so why did it take you 10 years to become board certified if you were competent after 3 years? Well, because the board requires this and this and this and this, and they go, oh, huh. So it's one thing to have an idea that you can even prove is a good idea. It's another thing to prove to the agencies that you have a product that's safe to put in a lot of patients and can scale and so on. So it's much more complex than newbies ever are aware. And phase zero, I love phase zero because you want to do as much as possible, like Travis said, in that phase zero stage as you possibly can, which de-risks the execution of the later stages.
Great advice. And so hopefully for those in our cohort that are in those earlier phase 0, phase 1 stages, doing as much possible. You're all participating MedTech Innovator, so that is great. You're getting feedback from all of the experts in our ecosystem, but make sure you're all taking this to heart. And so want to have one final question before we end here for everyone, just to share maybe a concrete example of a manufacturing challenge that you've solved during your career, and what can startups take away from this? So maybe they don't have to go through this themselves. So I don't know who we'll start with. Maybe Sahil, you want to start?
Yeah, we've just had one. And this is the thing about manufacturing. When you think everything's set up and running fine, suddenly something happens with a supplier. And it was just like, why did that happen? And I don't even think the supplier knows. So we have this way, it's proprietary, of bonding silicone to metal without glue. It means our biocompatibility risk has gone to 0, which is great. But there was something that happened with the tool. This is a a supplier based in China, and someone in that factory decided to take matters into their own hand, and they peeled off something from something, and then I'm not being very specific, but like they peeled off something they shouldn't have peeled off from the tool, and then that completely I don't know. It's just like, oh my God, seriously. And honestly, the way we solved it is through open communication, and it was, hey, can we help? What do you think went wrong? And it was kind of like trying to do some kind of root cause analysis, to the point where we are about to, we will get on a plane and fly out there again if we need to. That's what it takes. And so the thing I will say is that I don't think, and forgive me for saying this, Jeff, you're right. Many people wouldn't do this if they knew actually what it came into. But I think the cohort here are the slightly odd group of people that will do this, even though they don't know what it entails. And then when the problems come up, they know how to solve them, or they at least keep going. That's the resilience of why we're all here. So yeah, don't be phased, because everything is solvable at some point. And if it's not solvable, you just change strategy, right?
Great advice and example as well. I'm sorry to deal with that, but open communication is the takeaway there. Jeff, what about you? What's an example with some advice following?
So I was engulfed in Sahil's answer. Can you restate the question?
Yeah, just a manufacturing challenge that you've solved during your career. I'm sure there are many with some key lesson that our startups can take away as a result of that.
The most technically demanding project that I've done was back in the early 90s, because what we were trying to do started with the assumption that we could get components that would do the job we needed. That which proved to not be the case. I had to develop manufacturing processing that required a level of precision that didn't exist in the industry at the time. And but once we hit on it, it facilitated a technology which today is commonplace, now 35 years later, but at the time we made it was the world's smallest ultrasound device for coronary application. And with the frequencies we were dealing with and the size we're dealing with, it just required a level of manufacturing that just didn't exist. And so understanding what's going to be required to get into what you're trying to do, just be aware that you're going to get hit with some surprises, which will be far more demanding than you ever anticipated. And so whatever your plan is for budget and time to get things done, assume you're going to get hit.
Yeah,
A good friend of mine who had a Navy career before he got into medtech told me, and I pass this along to everybody always, he said, every project out there has a torpedo with your name on it, and you just don't know when that torpedo is going to hit. And so just be aware and be flexible. And as Sahil said, you got to power through these things because you don't know when those ahas are going to hit, and you have to be prepared to be resilient, pivot if necessary, or just power through them as necessary, and so on. So just expect those surprises, and don't cry about it when they hit. Just power through it.
Great. Yeah, be resilient. Also, good message here. Awesome. Liz, what is the example you want to share?
I think there's always a solution. I think it may not look the way you think. It may not be exactly what you want, but there is a way. And, a lot of things, I have a lot of examples to mind. I guess one of the ones that comes is with our recent COVID times and getting attention in the electronic market and all of the fun that entailed for people who have electronics embedded in their equipment, right? We had a need for somebody that we, had to have some programming off of, and I think it was an NVIDIA part, the GPU. And we were having a heck of a time getting any attention, getting any supply. I think the lead time was up to like 62 weeks. And so what we did is we went and we got their published list of their prime suppliers with primary access and supply. And we found a small to medium sized prime supplier for them. And we went and found those people and engaged with them, and were gladly willing to pay a little bit more to have that access to that supply at a significantly faster rate and be able to get the engagement that we needed from them in small quantities. So, that trade-off is you don't have the direct touch point with NVIDIA, but you're getting parts in half the time, and you're involving somebody who's a small to medium-sized supplier who's happy to have the business and the attention from you. So those types of lots of cold calling and lots of creative solutions. I think on the manufacturing side too, if I may, when you're having problems with tooling or with assemblies, again, with the creative solutions, if there's one person who knows how to do it, who has it figured out better than anybody else, film that person, stand next to them, document what they have to do, fly them to another plant to train somebody else. You have to be that, I think, tenacious when it comes to solving different challenges that crop up.
Yeah, great advice, and being creative. Love that. Ask around, get advice from others, and then Travis, will end with you.
No, I mean, I think Liz was reading my mind, because her example is almost identical to mine. But I'll just echo it. We go back to the COVID times, same kind of thought process. Mine was a little bit different. An IC chip we couldn't find, found it, different footprint, engineered an actual socket, right, to go on to the line, and utilize that same chip, same fit, form, function, just again different solution to the problem. To Sahil's point, and Liz and everyone else, Jeff as well, there's always a solution to the problem, right? period, full stop. Again, to Liz's point, you may not like it. It may cost more money. It may have a longer timeline, but there's always a solution, and there really is. And I can't say enough. You've got to be willing to move your stake, right? You can't be so set in only one way. If I can, that's a huge piece of advice, that there are so many solutions, and with the right partner, they have that expertise, even with their supply chain and their others. That's one thing that I've seen that I've pulled in on my career over my time is, how can I get the most people at the table? Because I am far from the smartest person in the room. I want as many smart people around me to help me solve that problem in various different ways, whether that's electrical, mechanical, software, design. It doesn't matter. Get them all in the room, everybody looking at it, even the founder. Come look at this with me. Help me understand, how is this supposed to work, and why is it not working the way you want it to? Or if you've got a problem, to Sal's point, get on the plane and go to Gemba, right? Go see what the problem is. Take a team of people with you, because there's nothing better than actually everybody eyes on, and you'll be amazed at how much faster those solutions will rise to the top than just kind of everyone sitting around on a Teams call and back and forth on email and this kind of thing. Really go to it and really see it. You'll solve it much quicker at a much faster pace. And and in my experience, it's much cheaper, right? It may cost you a little bit more in the short term, but in the long term, you'll have a solution that you'll be able to continue to grow with.
Well, that was fabulous advice, all of you guys, and hope the cohort learned a lot from that. Hope that those of you on LinkedIn learned a lot today. Cohort, please stick around for some Q&A, and then we've got a special announcement at the end as well, so definitely stay on. Those who joined us on LinkedIn, thank you so much for joining us today, and for the great question as well. Next week, we are not going to be having an MTI Live, because all of our companies and staff is going to be at the MedTech conference in San Diego. So definitely hope to see you there. If you're going to be going to that conference, come say hi. We've got showcase panels running pretty much straight during the entire conference at our stage in the expo hall, as well as 3 competitions there. So definitely check those out. We will resume our MTI Live series October 16th with moving MedTech from product to purchase. So we'll be talking all about MedTech sales and distribution. So what comes next after the manufacturing. So thank you so much to Liz, Travis, Jeff, and Sahil. Honestly, the most fun conversation about manufacturing and supply chain I've ever been a part of. So thank you guys for making it so enjoyable.